Hello, welcome to the Tripal Importer Guide.
So to start us out, I'm going to navigate to my Tripal site. So this is the base, the root of my Drupal site. And I'm going to go to where I keep my modules, which is by default in the site's all modules folder. And we're going to make, I keep them in this custom folder. You can see I have all of my own Tripal modules here. And I'm going to make a module that's we're going to call it Tripal Example Importer. So if we go into Tripal Example Importer, every module by default really needs, at a minimum, a file that's a .info file, and typically you'll also have a .module file, and then also a .install file. I don't think we need a .install file for this example today. And hopefully I can link another tutorial that walks through these basics a little bit more later. So we have these two files, and the idea is that imagine this module is going to just read in a very simple two-line comma-separated file, basically the output of a Microsoft Excel two-column spreadsheet. So all it's going to do, it's going to read those in to Shadow. So it's not going to display anything. There's no admin stuff. So what we can do is we can extend the Tripal Importer class, and all we need is a Tripal Importer file is our own extended class, and it will automatically show up on our Tripal site. So first of all, Tripal expects these files in a certain place, which is in the includes Tripal Importer location. Oops, Mictors. So if I go into this includes Tripal Importer, all I need to do is example importer dot, I guess it includes. So we make the file, and what this is going to be is it's going to extend the Tripal Importer class. So if we go into this is what we're looking at is in the Tripal includes, this is the base Tripal Importer class that we're going to be extending. And if you're not super familiar with how this works in PHP, this file is a class file. And to extend it, oops, I need to open the file I just made. So you can kind of ignore my diddling around in my IDE over here. This goes, what is it? Example importer, right? So importer, there we go. So it's going to be class example importer extends Tripal Importer. So this class, by just this bit of code, it has everything that the Tripal Importer class has. It has all these default statics. It has these default methods. But what we will need to do is we will want to extend the class so that it now fits our, instead of just being a generic loader, it loads this specific example format file that we're going to load. It needs to be in this example file. I just look. You only do this every so often. So I just copy something in. So this file has all these colons in it for some reason. Oh, these are supposed to be comments. Okay. So it's the Tripal Example Importer. Demonstrate how to use importer. Project Tripal. Package Tripal extensions. Version alpha sounds good to me. We don't have this. We don't have this. We do depend. We're going to say we depend on Tripal. We want Tripal to be installed for our module to work. And so you can see now that I've got some information in my .info file, I'm able to enable this module. So I have a Tripal site running. I have a triple site running on my development machine, so we can, once the cache clears after enabling a new module, we can take a look at it, and hopefully our importer is already showing up, even with just this totally empty file. Close. Oops, that was an example importer. So let's see. It's going to appear under Tripal Importers right here. So this is actually my loader I made. And you can see it has the default Tripal loader name. So out of the box, it has this handy file uploader guy. And the file part of this, it can handle uploads in one of three ways. It can handle someone using the interface and selecting a file and pressing upload file, which surprisingly it's going to be okay with, PNG. You can set which file extensions it'll allow, so often you'll say only accept a file that's .txt or .tsv, or like a FASTA loader only accepts .fasta, for example. And in this case, you can use that, or you could supply location, the file path on the server where the file is going to be, or, so this can be handy, it can handle multiple files this way really easily. Or we can supply a remote path. In this case, I have a GitHub location, a raw file location. So if you want to load data in, you can either add it manually, you can upload it to the server, or you can just have it online somewhere else. And then also by default, we get this ability to attach it to a test, or excuse me, an analysis. So in Shadow, I'm not going to get into the underlying Shadow structure, but this can be really handy because you can disable this or you can leave it enabled, but you have the stuff that gets loaded in is going to be cross-linked to this analysis record. So that's what we get by default. Now that we've defined our importer and it shows up, we are going to want to add some basic stuff to this importer. So to do that, you can always look at the base class, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy in these public static variables, and what we will do is we will either delete them, and so that we're going to skip over them, or we will define them to something. So let's see here. And in most cases, they're going to be pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to delete the comments. You could do that too to kind of clean up your code. We do this thing where we say like C Tripal Importer to kind of like this. If you want the documentation to actually point, you can just say, hey, look, check out the base class for this. Oops, I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna turn off my notifications real quick. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna change each of these variables so that we customize the importer. So this is gonna be example file importer. Let's make it like example. I'm gonna name TST for test file importer. So it's going to load this fictitious TST format. So TST loader. Loads TST file. So this is going to show up when they pick an importer on that page. So it can allow all file types, or we can say that it's only going to allow text or TST, and because this is text, I'm just going to make it a comma-separated file, let's say. We'll also allow, so these are the extensions that our importer will read. So here I'm going to say TST is a fictional 2-column CSV file. The column should be of the form feature name and text. So it's going to list a gene name and then some text, and maybe we'll associate that text with the gene via a property. We don't need to change this, and I'm just deleting that variable because it's going to use the class's default if I delete it. This determines if it uses an analysis or not. So we want to use an analysis. Do we want to require an analysis? You can have it use an analysis if one's present, but doesn't have to necessarily require it. And then your loader, it will check if it was given an analysis ID, and if so, it will do something with it. So let's keep this to true for now, so we can assume that our importer is going to get analysis. We can keep the button, the text the same. This determines which of those, let's see here. This determines which of these things it supports, so you can remove support for server or remote. If there's no reason not to, you should keep it because it's actually pretty handy. It can be really handy to use one or the other. File required. Maybe you have a file that doesn't, or you have a loader that doesn't need to use an actual file. Maybe it's only taking in form values from the user. There's no file needed, so you can set that to false. And that's cardinality. How many files should it expect? Should it allow more than one file? You can customize the menu path, which we're not going to do. And you can do some fancy stuff with callbacks, which we're also not going to do, so I'm just going to delete all that. I don't think I need this argument. Oh, this lets me change the machine name, the name, the description keys. So again, we don't need to mess with this. So, and I'm going to keep this. I think this is an important one just in general, so I'm keeping it there. Even though we didn't customize it, we could have deleted it. So now this is my base importer. So if I go back to my site and I go back to data loaders, I think I need to clear the cache. It's still showing up as the defaults. We won't need to clear the cache every time, but we will need to clear the cache if we change things about like the name of the importer and stuff. In the future, when we mess with the form, we won't have to clear the cache every time. So if we clear the cache, I'm going to, when we reload this page, we should now have an importer named example tst file importer. And it's going to take a second. And there we are. Here's the example tst file importer. Okay. So we've defined our importer. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to flesh out a couple of super basic important methods. So the first is the form function. The form function always takes 2 arguments. This is like a Drupal thing. In the guide, in the documentation that's going to be written to accompany this, there will be links to different parts of the Drupal API to understand some of this stuff. What the form does is it presents, it's how Drupal builds forms, which allows your users to input stuff that your loader is going to then use. So in the case of our example file, what we're going to want is we're going to want to write some instructions. We're going to maybe we'll also have pick a CV term, and what our loader is going to do, I'm going to write it in HTML. And do something like this. Welcome to the test loader. Paragraph. This is an example. I'm going to type out loud. This is an example loader to demonstrate the Tripal Importer class. input file should be blah. And then I'm going to say, we'll just call it lorem ipsum. And that's going to say, please, to load an example TSV file, TST file, you must specify a CV term for the values to be associated with. And so you all know what the heck I'm thinking about here. This is going to be an example file. It's going to look like this. Gene, and then maybe I'm just going to assign colors to gene features in my database. So what this gives, what the actual loader is going to do is it's going to define the function that will do something with what the form gets. So it's going to, A, it's going to read the file. B, it's going to insert the property into as a feature prop where the type ID equals the CV term picked in the form, and value equals the value of column 2. And where, excuse me, and where the feature ID equals value of column 1. So I know this doesn't make a ton of sense, maybe. Hopefully it's like a 2-column file. We're going to split it. We're going to read in the feature name, find the feature, and then we're going to insert a feature property for that feature where the value is the value of the column and where the type is the CV term that they pick. And it's going to be the same type because this is just a really simple, stupid thing. It's going to be the same type for everything. So right now, we're going to write some basic instructions, and then we're going to return this form. So what is form here? I have the developer module installed, which means I can do DPMs. So I'm going to DPM this form, and I'm going to, basically the way this is going to work is you pick, the form is an associative array. So I'm going to name an instructions key in the form and set it equal to each key is in turn going to be an array. The most basic entry you can put into the form is this. It can just be one of the more basic ones. Each of the keys should be a hashtag something to specify that it's like a property of the form piece. So if I submit this, hopefully, let's see what happens. We go back to we click on our TST form, and look, the text that I put in the markup shows up, and this DPM shows it's actually, right, I've got an array with one entry, with the instruction key, and the instruction key is this. So far, so good. So the next thing I might want to do is I might want to, we're going to have this pick CV term thing, right? So I could do this several ways. I'm going to do it a really, really kind of dumb, simple way first, just to demonstrate how it can work. So let's get some logic in here. Let's have it be a select box, okay? Whoops. So to do that, we say type is select, and I'm going to open the Tripal form API. Let's see, or the Drupal form API, which is quite the read. These are all of the different types of form elements. You can have checkboxes. You can have select, which is what I'm going to attempt to do here. Radio things. You can have raw text input. So if we click on select, it's going to show us, here's an example select value. So I'm just going to be really lame and just plop it all in there. I'll get rid of this so that it doesn't error at me. We'll comment this out. Okay, so we can pick selected. It's this difference in styling. I'm going to change that just so it's consistent. So with the type is selected, we can set the title element to selected, CC. And then the options is the important part. It's going to be an array of and so it's option 0 and 1, no and yes, and then it provides a description. So if we go back to our form, you can see here's my selected box. We have yes and no. So pretty simple, pretty good. So let's instead do something like a little more involving shadow. Let me keep this for easy reference so I can pretend I haven't forgotten what these things should be. So my options is going to be an array. And perhaps what we will do is we will do shadow get CV term. And I'm just going to pick, I'm going to do something really silly. And we're just going to only allow a couple of different terms here. So we're going to allow and you know this isn't particularly good code. It doesn't exactly make sense what I'm doing right now. But I just want you to get a sense for how you might populate stuff in your own forms. So what we're going to do is we're going to get two terms and also give you a sense of like if you're not super familiar of what to expect, what things are going to return, this is how you can really quickly get your feet wet, so to speak. So I just totally looked in the code. I picked this function, shadow get CV term. It's going to check the shadow CV term table for CV terms with this database and accession. So let's just show what this returns. So we've got term 1 and term 2. I go back here, I click refresh, and you can see it returns an object with all of these keys. So I want to put these terms in a select box. So what I might do is, again, not exactly I was trying to write a loop and I didn't even do it smart enough that I can write a loop. Doesn't matter. We're going to say options and set the key to term 1. What do we have? I want to use the CV term ID as the key. And the reason for that is the select, what's actually going to get passed on is the key later on. And we want to, what am I doing here? Term 1, CV term ID like this. So later on, when my form uses the value that the user selected, I want to make it easy on myself. So I want it to pass the CV term ID so I can use it to look up what term they selected. That's all. That's what I'm doing here. So we're going to say this is equal to term 1 name. I think that's a valid key. You can see it is. And then term 2, we'll do the same. We don't need this DPM anymore. And then we can do options. And use this options array we just built. And then we'll give it a title while we're at it. Call it CV term. And for description, we'll call it, please pick a CV term. The loaded TST file will associate the values with this term as a feature property. So let's see how we did. Oops, undefined index. Undefined for each. Oh, but look, I actually didn't do too terrible because here we have our drop box, and we can see that we got our two terms. So where did I mess up? Usually, you can look at this. Options and for each. Shoot. Was it not options? Well, maybe it was option. Anyway, we can look into making that not complain at me later. But okay, so no error now. So let's say if someone was running this form, all they would do is they would pick a file, upload it. No, and see here, it says it's only allowing text, TST, and CSV. So let me come back and make a fake file to show you all, and then I'll be able to upload it. Let's say they'd press upload the file, they pick an analysis, they'd pick a term. And so something I'm going to add, they pick a term and they press import file. If we press import file, what happens? We didn't provide a file, so it fails actually. But in general, what you actually want to do is do something like this. You want to set a default so that now if I look at this, now that we have our Dropbox loaded, let's well, before I move on, I'll just point out that I couldn't help myself and I spruced this up a little bit. So now we iterate through this array of terms and get the CV term, and then we stick them in the options array. So it results in this dropdown. The default is please select an option with the key of 0. The others have a key of whatever the CV term ID is. So the next thing I want to show you is how do we validate the form. So don't get confused. If you're using a triple importer, the way to do it is to use the form validate function written in this manner. The Drupal way would be to do something like this, except it would have to be the name, because the namespace is an issue. It would have to be like triple example import or my form validate. Right, this underscore form validate, this hooks into Drupal's form validate. The importer class provides this function for you to extend to do your validation, which ultimately does, I think, use the Drupal hook. So don't mix them up. You want to use this form validate. Can leave in the parents form validate. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I don't have this option selected basically. So something I want to show you, right? It's going to actually live in form state values, I believe. But I can test that by, let's set it to this, click import file. I am expecting it to fail. There we go. So this is all the stuff that was in my form state. And one of them is form state values. We have analysis ID. So you can see it actually failed the analysis validation, although we don't have to worry about it. And also, here's our pick CV term. This is what we named that form element. So what you'll typically do if you're writing your validation function is you will first you'll get all of the values you need to evaluate. For me, it's just a single one. So we'll do something like this. What was it? It was pick CV term. So, and then basically I don't want this to be 0. So I might just do something like if chosen CV term is equal to 0, we will do form set Drupal set message. I don't quite recall what I'm supposed to do. It is form set error, actually. Yeah, form set error. Form set error. And then you pick the element. So we say pick CV term. This is what we want to give us an error. And then the message. Please choose a CV term. And I think that's all we need to do. If this was a more complicated thing, we might go through more of these. Or we might say chatto get CV term. And then for the identifiers, I think we'd do something like this. I'm not positive this is 100% kosher. We want I'm more inclined to just do a select statement and look in the CV term table and see if the number we got is a real CV term. But we don't have to worry about that because we're feeding it known CV terms. So now what happens if we go back to our form? Let me try to submit it. You see, it tells me, it gives me my message, and it highlights it in red. If I pick a CV term, it's no longer highlighted in red. The message goes away. So that is it for validation. So now that we're happy with our validation, what we're going to do is we're going to make a function that will run after the form gets submitted. So normally in like plain Drupal, this would be a form underscore submit function, but because we're extending the Tripal Importer class, it's going to work a little bit differently. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to extend the run function. So the run function, it won't take any arguments, but what it's going to do is it's going to pull the file. It's going to pull the file information, and it's going to pull the all right, we're going to take a break while I. There we go. All right, let's pretend I didn't do this. We're going to start here. 3, 2, 1. So the run function the run function does not take any arguments, and instead it's going to pass things from the public static properties. So if you're not familiar with classes in PHP, these are properties that live in the class that we set, but after validation passes and when the job is submitted and ran, the class is going to prepare the files and it's going to make them available to it in certain places. So we're going to get arguments from this arguments run args. So pretty much always write this out. And let's make it a little less confusing like this. We'll call it run args because that's what it's called. And then the other thing we need is the file. And the file is stored in this arguments files. And then in this case, our importer is only accepting one file. Above there was an option for cardinality. So it would always be file 0, but if we had multiple files, we might need to pass all of them in. And then the file path. So this is always going to be the file path, regardless of if it is a remote file or a local file, because there's another function, prepare files, that has run. So we don't need to worry about it. I'm just letting you know. It'll come up again when I cover testing this importer. So we look at our form and we know, okay, we have a pick CV term, and then let's actually just look at the form. Oops, don't have the form open. Let's go back. So we can look at the form. We actually know it's going to pass the file, it's going to pass the analysis ID and the CV term that got picked. So, right, this and this. So those are going to be whatever I named the CV term, which is pick CV term. And this is a CV term ID. It's very simple, and the same thing. I like to remind myself that I only have an ID instead of an object. So analysis ID is in run args analysis ID. And then we'll run this read TST file, and we'll pass in analysis ID, CV term ID, and the file path. So now this should run when and let's add the arguments here. Just copy them. So if I submit my form now, and I do what's going to happen is it's going to create a job and we'll run the job. So I'm going to switch from DPMs to var dumps or prints. Log. This is running. So I need to, remember we said it needs a text file. So we'll need to point it to a text file. Let's see if I have one handy. I bet I do in my dataset folder. Let's see here. So I have this very handy module, the devseed module. I really recommend if you ever need like simple data to use, it can make your life a lot easier. I really do recommend checking it out. So like for example, I know here is a TSV file. Oh no, I didn't allow TSV. I only read CSV. Oh geez, let's just change that. That will make just for the sake of making this work without. I actually think I need to clear the cache now, so let's do that. So, oops, we'll need to reload the page. Okay. Reloaded. It allows me to upload it now because I added TSV. Let's pick an analysis. Let's pick a CV term. So what happens, it should pass validation. We'll say, okay, a job was submitted. So what you can do is you can copy this command, you paste it from somewhere that has access to Drush. And look, our string, this is running. Passed through. And I probably, normally, maybe I'd do something a bit more, something like this, make our lives a little more interesting. Let's instead pass it a string, and then all of the arguments. So let's just resubmit this, or let's actually, so at this point, nothing's going to change in my job submission. So in terms of like, oh, how do I test this? This is kind of like medium level helpful. You go to the jobs page. So I clicked on this link to go to the jobs page, and then I can click rerun, and it'll create a new job that's now waiting, and then I can just re-execute this command. At the end, end of the video, I'm going to show you the test suite way of doing it, and that hopefully, I love doing it that way. It makes it so much easier. So you can see that now, maybe if I was a little smarter, I would have made this an array with keys that named the variables, but as it is, you can see we have an analysis ID, the CV term ID, and the path to the file that where the file was. So our importer, we now have it running. We've confirmed we're passing variables into the importer. So what I will cover in the next video is we'll just follow through. We'll create an example file. We will code a little bit of logic, and then we will create a functional test for the whole loader and unit tests for the, we'll break up the functionality into unit tests, and we'll show how we can create the loader using tests. So I'll see you then.